The Manhattan skyline shimmered against the dusky July sky, each tower etched in gold like a monument to ambition. Among them, one building stood taller than the rest, both in height and in symbolic irony: the Whitaker Tower. Imani Brooks stepped out of the black Rolls-Royce onto Fifth Avenue's gleaming sidewalk, her heels clicking confidently against the granite. She paused for a moment, adjusting the lapel of her fitted navy suit, her name embroidered in gold thread inside the collar. A personal touch from her youngest daughter, Sky. 8 years ago, Imani had walked these same streets holding a man's dreams in one hand and a set of divorce papers in the other. She had been pregnant then, 5 months, along with triplets, abandoned publicly, humiliated, and quietly erased by the man who'd sworn to build an empire with her. Now she owned one. Phoenix Holdings, her brainchild and battle cry, occupied the top 3 floors of Whitaker Tower. Her logo, a rising gold phoenix, glowed like fire against the glass. It was more than branding. It was a declaration. "Ms. Brooks," a calm voice said into her earpiece, "your suite is ready. Mr. Whitaker and the girls landed 20 minutes ago. They're waiting upstairs." Imani turned slightly to acknowledge her assistant Miguel, who stood at a discreet distance beside the car. "Tell Graham I'll be up in 10. I just need a moment." Miguel nodded and stepped aside without a word. He understood her silences. Imani's gaze traveled upward, 30, 40, 50 floors. Somewhere around the 12th to 15th, her ex-husband's old company, Carter Innovations, still squatted like a ghost of the past. That irony always made her smile. 8 years ago, she couldn't afford a studio apartment in the Bronx. Tonight, she would sleep in the penthouse of the city's most exclusive high-rise, with 3 daughters and a fiancé who loved her like no man ever had. She exhaled slowly. The wind lifted her natural curls slightly, reminding her of nights when the city's cold bit into her skin because she couldn't afford proper heat. The contrast was dizzying. Imani had been 24 fresh from Wharton's MBA program, full of vision, full of love. Nathan Carter had been her equal in ambition, but not in character. He was 27, brilliant, charming, and broke. But she saw the spark in him, the kind of fire that just needed oxygen. "Marry me," he had whispered one night as they ate ramen under candlelight in their one-bedroom walk-up. The diamond had been cubic zirconia, the promise behind it far more precious, at least she had believed. "I'm going to build an empire," Nathan said that night, "and I want you to be my queen." She hadn't even hesitated. Her heart had been so full it could have burst. For 3 years they had soared. Her family's connections in politics and business opened doors Nathan couldn't touch alone. Her inheritance, a $50 million trust fund left by her grandfather, a civil rights attorney, became the foundation of Carter Innovations. Imani were going to change the world, Nathan had told her, his arm draped over her bare shoulders in the penthouse her money had paid for. But dreams can turn into nightmares in the blink of an eye. Imani's hand moved to her flat stomach, now out of instinct, remembering the moment she told Nathan she was pregnant. Triplets. Their miracle babies conceived during a weekend at her family's beach house in the Hamptons. He'd cried. He'd spun her around the kitchen and kissed every inch of her belly. He'd read baby books, picked names, and built 3 cribs. For 4 months, it had been a dream. Then Lauren Bishop walked into their lives. She was Nathan's new assistant. Blonde, bold, ruthless. Imani had pitied her at first, a single mom with a story full of holes. Imani had helped her get health care. She'd even vouched for her when she got written up for being late. She hadn't expected to find Lauren in her bed, tangled in sheets Imani had picked out, with the man who'd promised her the world. "It's not what it looks like," Nathan had stammered. But it was. 2 days later, he handed her divorce papers like he was closing a business deal. "You're too intense. Too controlling," he'd said, his voice as cold as the marble floors in their kitchen. "Lauren makes me feel free." He had used her money to hire lawyers who painted Imani as unstable and manipulative. He froze her accounts. By her 8th month of pregnancy, she was living in a basement apartment in Queens, working 3 part-time jobs and taking the subway to prenatal appointments. She had nothing, not even a support system. Her water broke 6 weeks early. She nearly died giving birth to 3 daughters, Amarania and Sky, in a public hospital. No epidural, no hand to hold. Her heart had stopped twice. River, the smallest, had been born not breathing. Imani had begged God to take her instead. But they all lived, barely. Her mother, Justice Regina Brooks, flew in from Washington, but her obligations on the federal bench meant she couldn't stay long. For 2 years, Imani scraped by, surviving on caffeine and willpower. She cried into laundry baskets and learned how to stretch a single diaper for 2 hours. She swore her daughters would never know the ache of abandonment. And then one night she slipped on a spilled glass of wine while serving tables in Midtown. A man caught her before she hit the floor. "Are you okay?" he'd asked. Not with annoyance, with concern. His eyes were blue, not cold but steady, kind. That was Graham Whitaker, ex-Navy SEAL, now a tech investor, and eventually the man who would teach her how to breathe again. Imani smiled at the memory. How gently he'd moved into their lives. How he never tried to fix her, just stood beside her while she put herself back together. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. The lock screen showed Graham and the girls laughing in Central Park. The photo made her throat tighten. For years she had survived. Now she was thriving. Tonight marked her return. Tomorrow the world would remember the name Imani Brooks not as a footnote in Nathan Carter's story, but as the woman who had risen from the ashes and written her own. She glanced at the glass entrance of the tower. Time to go up. As she stepped forward, her reflection in the doors met her with poise and quiet defiance. The phoenix had returned, and this time she wasn't rising quietly. The elevator glided smoothly upward, its interior lined with dark mahogany and polished brass. Imani watched the glowing numbers rise as her reflection stared back at her, in the mirrored walls, calm, poised, invincible. But inside, the memories stirred like ghosts behind locked doors. As the elevator reached the top floor, she stepped out into a private vestibule. The scent of lavender and warm oak greeted her, a subtle blend Graham had chosen for their home, one that reminded her of peace. Her assistant Miguel waited with a tablet in hand, but she raised a finger. "Not yet," she said quietly. Miguel nodded and disappeared behind a panel door, understanding that she needed these next few minutes alone. The penthouse was quiet. A warm amber glow spilled from beneath a closed door where the girls were likely curled up with their books or chattering in excited whispers. Somewhere beyond that, Graham would be waiting with a glass of her favorite wine and a knowing smile. But tonight before joy, there would be reckoning. She walked into her study and closed the door. The city sparkled below her like a jewel-studded blanket, vast and full of secrets. Her eyes drifted to a photograph on the bookshelf, an old one buried among newer frames filled with giggles and sandy beach memories. In it, Nathan stood with his arm around her, both of them grinning, bathed in candlelight, a tray of takeout between them. It was the night they decided to go all in. That version of Nathan had been different, hungry, tender, almost boyish in his ambition. The first time she met him was at a pitch competition in Philly. He didn't win, but he had captivated everyone. Not with polish he had none, but with fire. He spoke about digital inclusion, about building tech for underserved communities, and she had leaned forward in her seat, heart racing not from attraction, but recognition. Here was someone who understood purpose, who wanted to build something real. They bonded quickly. Study dates turned into business brainstorming. Theirs wasn't a whirlwind romance, it was a partnership from day one. He'd proposed 3 months later in their kitchen, kneeling with a ring he'd saved for by skipping meals. "You'll never regret this," he said. "We'll make history together." Imani had believed him, with everything in her. She introduced him to her mother, to her family's old political allies, to the investors her grandfather had once mentored. She opened doors he'd never even knocked on. And then she opened her trust. $50 million, not as a loan, as belief, as love. They scaled quickly. Carter Innovations became a rising star in the tech world. Nathan charmed every investor. Imani worked behind the scenes, shaping strategy, pitching to VCs, and designing infrastructure that could withstand explosive growth. But slowly the cracks appeared. At first she noticed subtle shifts. He stopped saying we and began using I. Her suggestions were dismissed in meetings. He stopped inviting her to key dinners, calling them boys' club stuff she wouldn't enjoy. She let it slide. She was pregnant after all. She needed rest, and he was under pressure. Then Lauren Bishop joined the company. She had come in with a glowing resume and a personal sob story, single mom, 2 jobs fresh out of a breakup. Imani, moved by her vulnerability, had advocated for her hiring. She even personally ensured Lauren got on the company health plan. Lauren thanked her by taking her place in every room, including her marriage bed. The day Imani found them together was cold. She'd just come from a prenatal appointment, ultrasound photos in hand. The babies were growing well. The doctors said they were strong. She had taken the subway home, eager to surprise Nathan early. And there they were, in their bed, in the sheets she'd picked out, in the room she'd painted herself just months before. Nathan hadn't even had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm in love with her," he said 3 days later, tossing divorce papers onto the dining table like a sales report. You're too much, Amani. You've always been too much. I need someone who lets me breathe. And what about our children? She'd asked, one hand on her belly, voice steady, despite the quake inside her. I'll pay child support, but I can't be tied down. I'm building something here. He left that night. By morning, her bank accounts were frozen. His lawyers paid for with her trust fund filed emergency motions alleging she was mentally unstable, a flight risk. They argued that she had trapped him with a pregnancy, that she was trying to manipulate him emotionally during a crucial fundraising period. The press leaked a story that painted her as a jealous ex, vindictive and erratic. Investors pulled out. Her name vanished from company documents. She was forced out of their penthouse. None of her prior work was acknowledged, only his. Her own family's lawyers tried to help, but time was against her. Court dates were delayed, papers lost in processing. By the 8th month, she was broke, alone, and back in a neighborhood she thought she'd left behind. When the girls came early, it wasn't a dramatic TV moment. There was no one rushing her to the hospital, no hand gripping hers during contractions. She called a lift. She checked herself into the ER. And when her heart stopped, she did not expect to wake up. But she had. Because she had something to live for. 3 somethings. Amara, Nia, Sky. They were tiny, impossibly so. Each one fought for every breath in the NICU. She spent sleepless nights between bassinets, pumping milk every 2 hours, crying quietly into a borrowed hoodie. She learned how to live off rice and frozen vegetables. She took jobs as a barista, a temp receptionist, and a late-night waitress at a hotel bar where guests ordered $1,000 wines while she split diaper packs into thirds to make them last longer. For 2 years, she survived in a fog of fatigue and heartbreak. Then Graham happened. The night she spilled a tray of burgundy onto a hedge fund manager's suit, she expected to be fired. Instead, the man he was dining with, Graham, helped her up and asked if she was okay. No judgment, no theatrics, just a man who saw a human being, not a mistake. He returned the next night, and again the next, always asking for her section, always tipping more than he should. Eventually, he learned her story, and instead of offering charity, he offered partnership. At first, she refused, but Graham was persistent, not in romance, but in belief. He had been watching her handle chaos with grace, intelligence, and quiet fire. "You're not broken," he once said. "You're battle-tested." He helped her register her first LLC, Phoenix Holdings. She had always dreamed of helping startups in underserved communities. Now she had seed capital, mentorship, and the freedom to lead without compromise. And she did. Within 5 years, she turned Phoenix into a portfolio empire. She reinvested in female founders, reclaimed clients that Carter Innovations had neglected, and rewrote the rules of tech leadership. All without stepping on a stage. Until now. Now it was time to step into the light. And when she did, Nathan Carter would realize the empire he had built was standing on the bones of the woman he left behind. And the storm she brought with her was just getting started. The rain came suddenly that night, a torrential summer downpour that slapped the windows of the basement apartment in rhythmic panic. Emily stood at the tiny sink washing a single plate from her late dinner instant oatmeal, again flavored with cinnamon she'd stolen from a cafe condiment bar, when she felt the strange tug low in her abdomen. Then came the unmistakable wetness. Her water had broken. She blinked, stunned for a moment. Her mind raced. She was barely 34 weeks. The girls weren't supposed to arrive for another 6. She hadn't even finished sorting the second-hand baby clothes she'd picked up from the church's donation drive last weekend. There were still no cribs, no car seats, no hospital bag. The pain hit next, a sharp, breathtaking jolt that made her grip the counter with both hands. There was no one to call. Her phone sat on the chipped windowsill beside her, displaying a missed reminder, prenatal class. Canceled. She wiped her hands on her shirt, clutching the cheap Android phone, with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. Her voice was calm when she called the lift, but she had to pause every few seconds to breathe. The driver looked nervous when she climbed in. "You good?" he asked, eyeing her bulging stomach. "Hospital now." He didn't ask anything else. By the time they reached Mount Sinai's ER, her contractions were less than 5 minutes apart. Nurses rushed her inside while the Lyft driver drove off without even waiting for 5 stars. In the bright white blur of the triage room, Imani tried to explain her situation to a nurse. "I don't have insurance," she whispered between gasps, "but I'll pay. Somehow." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice, squeezed her hand. "You're having triplets, sweetheart. Right now, nobody cares about insurance. We care about keeping you and those babies alive." She was whisked into delivery prep, given a hospital gown, and hooked up to monitors. The sound of 3 tiny heartbeats echoed through the room like thunder in her ears. She stared at the ceiling, mouth dry, her fingers, searching for someone's hand, but there was no one there. The hours passed in agony, 42 of them to be exact. Imani lost track of time, her body fighting to bring life into the world as it unraveled from exhaustion. Her legs cramped, her back screamed, her stomach contorted in unrelenting waves of pressure. There was no epidural. The anesthesiologist had been pulled into a multi-car accident emergency across town, and she was too far along by the time he returned. Every nurse on rotation knew her name by the end. But there was one she never forgot. Nurse Angela. She stayed long after her shift ended, holding Imani's hand through every surge, wiping sweat from her brow, whispering, "You're almost there, Mama. You're doing this. You're not alone." But she was. Nathan was off in the Maldives with Lauren. Their wedding photos had just been published online that same week. A beachfront ceremony with white orchids and designer suits. Imani had seen them by accident, flashed across the TV in the hospital lobby while she waited for her prenatal appointment. Her hands had shaken, but she hadn't looked away. Focused, Nurse Angela whispered now as the monitors started beeping faster. "We're crowning. First baby's ready." At 2:13 a.m., the first cry cut through the room like a lifeline. Amara. Tiny, furious, alive. Imani sobbed as they lifted her daughter away. "Go with her," she said, breathless, to the nurse. "Don't let her be alone." But there was no time. Nia followed 12 minutes later, quiet, observant, blinking wide at the world as though she already had questions to ask. Then Sky. Breach. Something went wrong. The doctor's tone shifted. Monitors screamed. Nurses moved faster. Blood. So much blood. Imani felt herself slipping. Her vision dimmed, a roar in her ears. She heard the words crash, team and code blue. Then, nothing. She woke to a tube down her throat in the cold beeping of machines. Her chest ached. Her throat burned. Her body felt like it had been broken and glued back together. "Welcome back," a nurse said softly, tears in her eyes. "You were gone for 4 minutes." 4 minutes. Imani turned her head slowly, wincing at the pain. A photo taped to the wall across from her showed 3 tiny babies in incubators, each with a name written in colorful marker above their heads. Amara, Nia, Sky. "They're fighters," the nurse said, "just like their mama." Tears welled in Imani's eyes as the enormity hit her. She had died and come back. For them. The next few weeks passed in a blur of NICU visits, late-night pumping sessions, and whispered prayers over fragile bodies behind glass. The girls had tubes and monitors and alarms that went off at the slightest flutter of their heart rates. Imani spent every waking moment by their side, sleeping in a donated chair, surviving on vending machine coffee and microwave oatmeal. She read to them from worn library books. She sang lullabies off-key. She promised them a world better than the one they had entered. No one visited. Not Nathan, not his parents. Not a single soul from the life she'd once helped build. Justice Brooks flew in briefly, Imani's mother, torn between her daughter's tragedy and her duties on the bench. She stayed long enough to kiss the girls and arrange a lawyer, then was gone again, leaving behind flowers and a bottle of herbal sleep drops Imani never touched. One night, as a storm raged outside the NICU windows, Imani broke down. The nurse's station had gone quiet. The girls were stable, but the fear still gripped her. She sat beside Sky's incubator, her smallest daughter barely 3 pounds. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I should have given you more. I should have made better choices. You deserve the world, and I gave you nothing but struggle." Her voice caught. "But I swear to you, this isn't the end. You're not going to be defined by how you got here. None of you are." She laid her hand gently against the glass. "I will rise. For you." True to her word, she left the hospital weeks later with her daughters bundled in secondhand blankets, their lungs strong and their eyes wide. They went home to that same basement apartment, 3 bassinets crammed beside a futon, a fridge with half a gallon of milk and some rice. But they were alive. And for Imani, that was enough. She didn't have a partner. She didn't have wealth. She didn't even have a crib for each girl. But she had resolve, and the kind of clarity that only comes after you've been dragged through hell and lived to crawl out. The pain wasn't gone, but it no longer owned her. From the ruins of betrayal and blood and loneliness, Imani would begin again. She didn't yet know the shape of her future, but she knew one thing for certain. The world hadn't seen the last of her. The hotel bar smelled faintly of bourbon and regret. Every Thursday night, Amani worked the closing shift at the Danforth, a boutique midtown hotel that catered to out-of-town executives in discreet affairs. The air was always thick with the perfume of power-silent deals inked between bites of filet mignon eyes that never quite met and toast that masked betrayal. Amani moved among them like a shadow, efficient, invisible. She wore her hair tied back, her blouse buttoned high, and her name tag perfectly aligned. No one ever remembered the waitress. That suited her just fine. She didn't need to be seen. Her daughters were 2.5 now, walking babbling, always hungry. They lived in a slightly better apartment thanks to the second job, a small one-bedroom above a laundromat in Harlem. Amara, the leader, had learned to soothe her sisters when Amani was late from work. Nia drew constellations on the walls with crayons, and Sky had a habit of trying to climb everything Crib's counters, even Amani herself. They were her joy, her reason, her gravity. And because of them, she couldn't afford to fall apart. It was the last shift before her planned 2 days off. She'd saved just enough to buy each girl a tiny pair of winter boots from the clearance rack. That alone gave her energy. Table 9, the hostess whispered, handing her a tray. 2 guests. Be careful with the one in the navy suit. He's the type who calculates your tip before you even greet him. Imani smiled tightly. She was used to that type. When she reached the table, she placed the glasses down with practiced ease. Good evening, gentlemen. Would you like to start with the house red or something? And then she tripped. The tray, slick with condensation, slid from her fingers. A full glass of red wine flew like a missile straight toward the man in the navy suit. It hit him square in the chest. Silence. The table froze. The other man, a lean, older gentleman with a silver beard, let out a soft gasp. The wine dripped down the silk of the suit jacket, staining it like blood. Amani's heart plummeted. I'm so sorry, she stammered. I'll get towels, It's fine, the man in the suit said calmly. She blinked. He stood pulling off the jacket with a grace that made her pause. Underneath, a crisp white shirt clung to his frame, equally ruined, but he didn't yell, didn't sneer, didn't even frown. Instead, he smiled. It's just fabric, he said. I've survived worse. Imani handed him napkins, her hands shaking. I'll pay for dry cleaning, or a replacement. Please just don't report this. I need this job. His smile faded a little, replaced by something gentler. What's your name? Ipinayar Surdi Imani. He extended a hand. Graham. She hesitated, then shook it. The touch was brief, warm, steady. I'll tell you what, Imani, he said, taking a seat again, as if nothing had happened. You bring me your best whiskey and we'll pretend that never happened. She blinked. Really? Really? She turned to go, but he added, and tell me, what's your favorite whiskey? She paused. I don't drink. He tilted his head. Any reason? Imani swallowed. I have 3 daughters at home. If I fall asleep too hard, I miss the 2 a.m. diaper shift. Graham chuckled, low and genuine. The other man at the table, his brother, as she would later learn, leaned back, studying her with mild interest. I like her, he said. You should hire her. Graham came back the next week, and the one after that. Always in her section, always polite. Sometimes with a guest, sometimes alone. He never flirted, never overstepped. He asked about her girls, listened when she spoke. Once he left a children's book with a note, for your 3 stars. Imani tried to remain distant. She'd been burned, badly. The scar still bled some nights. But Graham wasn't like the others. He never asked for her number. Never pressured her, just showed up, like clockwork. 3 months in, she finally asked, why do you keep coming back? He sipped his tea and smiled. Because you're the only person in this city who doesn't pretend. That night, he walked her to the subway. No expectations, no games. Let me drive you home, he offered when he saw her rubbing her feet. No, thank you. You don't trust me. No, I don't. Fair enough. And he didn't ask again. It took her nearly a year to let him meet the girls. They were wary at first. Amara stared him down like a tiny judge. Nia buried herself behind Imani's leg. Sky, ever bold, demanded he tie her shoe. He did. Imani watched as Graham knelt before her daughters without hesitation, without performance. He didn't talk down to them. He listened. He let them be strange, loud, shy, wild. By dinner, Amara was sitting on his lap explaining the phases of the moon with a crayon. Nia had drawn him a picture of a rainbow house. Sky had fallen asleep against his chest. Imani had stood at the doorway, arms crossed, waiting for the panic to rise. It didn't. Instead, she felt something still, safe. One night, Graham showed up at her apartment with a set of used books, entrepreneurship guides, finance workbooks, and an old laptop. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the bundle. "You mentioned your business idea once," he said. "You've got the mind for it. Just needed tools." She hesitated. "You think I can start a company while raising 3 kids and working 2 jobs?" "I think you already are," he replied. "You're just not getting paid for it yet." She laughed, incredulous. "You're insane. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering investment. In you." That night after the girls went to bed, she opened the books. She stayed up until 3 a.m. taking notes. Graham never pushed, never asked for a timeline. He simply continued showing up. At the park, at the grocery store, at recitals. He held umbrellas, changed flat tires, waited in DMV lines. One time when Sky ran a fever and the pediatric clinic was closed, he drove across town in the snow to find baby Tylenol. Not once did he call himself stepdad. But the girls started calling him G, and Imani started breathing easier. Not because she needed saving, but because for the first time in a long time, someone chose to stay. Not for what she could give. Not for appearances. Just, for her. 2 years later, Graham stood beside her as she signed the papers to incorporate Phoenix Holdings. She wore a blazer with a juice stain on the sleeve. He wore a t-shirt that read, "Girls run the world, I just drive." They filed the LLC in Amara's name. Sky provided the company's motto, "We build like mom." Nia drew the logo, a rising bird with wild wings. It was clumsy, it was chaotic, it was perfect. And in that moment, standing in a rented office with broken blinds and secondhand chairs, Amani felt something shift. Not in her career, not in her finances, in her heart. The loneliness was gone. And in its place, just so odd, a life she'd built from ashes, with a stranger who refused to walk away. The office was only 600 square feet with warped floors and ceiling tiles that sagged whenever it rained. The heating barely worked in the winter, and in summer the windows stuck so tightly they might as well have been painted shut. But to Imani it was the palace she'd been promised. The moment she signed the lease, she walked across the squeaky hardwood floor and stood at the farthest window looking out at the gritty side of the Bronx. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from recognition. It was happening. The dream she'd put to sleep during hospital nights and waitress shifts was waking up. Phoenix Holdings was no longer an idea whispered between diaper changes. It was real, and it would rise. Graham, ever patient, brought her a used espresso machine and wired together a few standing desks from Facebook Marketplace. The girls painted inspirational phrases on printer paper and taped them to the wall. "Fly high, mommy," and "Be the boss of the sky." Imani brought one thing to the office that cost her nothing: clarity. She knew who Phoenix would serve. Founders like her. People who didn't come from legacy or capital but from lived experience. Immigrants, women, the formerly incarcerated single mothers with side hustles who'd been laughed out of bank meetings. Innovators who'd been overlooked because they didn't speak in buzzwords or wear the right shoes. She started with microloans and consulting, $5,000 here, a branding session there. Word spread quickly. Within the first 3 months, Phoenix had helped launch 8 small businesses: a food truck, a mobile tutoring service, a natural skincare brand. Imani, one client, said, crying during her pitch session, "You don't just invest money, you invest dignity." That became the company's unofficial tagline. Graham ran the back-end filing paperwork, managing legal compliance, fixing the copy machine with a butter knife. The girls played on a mat in the corner building block towers while their mom built equity frameworks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was sacred. The real test came 6 months later. A large investment firm called Halbert and Lang reached out. They wanted to meet. Imani almost ignored the email. She assumed it was a prank. But Graham urged her to respond. "I think someone's been watching," he said. "Phoenix is making noise." At the meeting, she sat across from 4 men in suits who looked like they'd never missed a golf invitation in their lives. They glanced at her resume, nodded politely, and one even asked if she had a business partner who could explain the tech side more thoroughly. She almost walked out. But then she saw the logo on the corner of one portfolio. A startup she'd helped incubate 2 months prior. A mental health app for teens in underserved schools was listed as a rising gem in their asset column. She leaned in. "Did you know the founder of that app was denied funding by your West Coast branch because she didn't go to Stanford?" She asked, her voice sharp. The men blinked. "And did you know her revenue tripled after Phoenix Holdings helped her pivot her model and gain traction with Gen Z female users? But maybe your algorithm didn't catch that because it doesn't read nuance or humanity." Silence. Imani stood, gathered her folder, and smiled. "You don't need to believe in me, but you will need me because I know what the future looks like. I gave birth to it." She left the room without waiting for their response. 2 weeks later, the same firm offered her a $2 million fund to manage through Phoenix. She declined. Instead, she launched her own fund with help from local angels, small contributors, and one especially bold credit union in Brooklyn. Imani named the fund Ash and Gold. As Phoenix grew, so did her confidence. She hired her first employee, Maya, a single mother of two, who'd previously worked front desk at a bank and been laid off during restructuring. Imani trained her personally, taught her how to read term sheets, how to speak to CEOs without flinching. Don't mimic them, she said during Maya's first board call. Make them adjust to you. They closed 5 deals that quarter. Each win was celebrated not with champagne, but with pizza on the floor and juice boxes for the kids. The girls would make glitter signs and hang them above the entryway. Clients began calling it the Joy Office. The nickname stuck. 3 years in Phoenix Holdings had helped over 300 small businesses launch, scale, or stabilize. Imani had spoken at conferences, been featured in Fast Company, and invited to join panels where people now listened when she spoke. She wore the same suit she'd used for her food stamp renewal interview when she made her first national television appearance. And when asked how she turned her life around, she answered simply, by betting on people the world ignored, starting with myself. On a Tuesday morning, while her daughters danced in ballet class and Graham made French toast at home, Imani stood at the front window of the new Phoenix HQ, a sunlit 2-story space in Soho, with polished concrete floors and artwork from local youth programs. She sipped her coffee and thought of her first office with the leaky window and creaky floor. She thought of hospital lights, of silence, of wine stains and strangers' kindness. From there to here, and it still felt like just the beginning. The city outside hadn't changed. It still moved fast, still shimmered with promises and pretenses. But Imani Brooks had changed. She no longer needed to knock on doors that had been slammed in her face. She was building her own. And those doors, they stayed open. The invitation arrived in a black velvet envelope, the gold embossed letters practically daring her to ignore it. Carter Innovations, 10 Years of Excellence Gala. Location, the Met Cloisters. Black tie, special tribute to founder and visionary Nathaniel Carter. Imani read the name 3 times before setting the card down on her desk. It trembled slightly under her fingers, but her face stayed calm. Graham looked up from the other side of the office, sensing the shift in the air. Something wrong, he asked. She slid the invitation across to him. He read it, blinked once, then handed it back. They're honoring him, she said, for building something he didn't actually build. He knows you built it, Graham replied. That's why he erased you. She leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the ceiling. The room around her was filled with framed photos of Phoenix clients, single moms, immigrants, formerly incarcerated founders, teenagers who turned app ideas into national platforms. Her empire had grown in silence. Now the world was being invited to celebrate the man who had stolen her voice. I'm going, she said. Graham raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I won't cause a scene, she said softly. I just want him to see that I'm alive, that I thrived. Graham nodded. Then let's find you something to wear that says exactly that. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear, the air tinged with honeysuckle and autumn. The Met Cloisters was lit like a cathedral, every archway glowing, the cobblestone courtyard filled with the elite of New York's tech world. Limos lined the perimeter. Waiters in white gloves passed around glasses of champagne and tiny bites no one actually ate. Imani stepped from the car in a gown the color of storm clouds. It clung to her frame, like it had been poured over her, the fabric shimmering with every movement. Her curls were pinned high, exposing the sharp line of her jaw. Diamond studs, Graham's anniversary gift, flashed beneath the moonlight. People turned. Some recognized her instantly, others stared, trying to place her. She walked slowly, deliberately past former investors, board members, journalists, past ex-assistants and ex-friends who had quietly backed away when Nathan buried her. No one dared speak first. Inside, the great hall pulsed with music and networking. The walls were lined with digital projections of Carter Innovations milestones, offices around the world, product launches, images of Nathan shaking hands with tech titans and politicians. Near the center stood the man himself, Nathan. He looked almost the same, slick, polished, wearing a tuxedo that likely cost more than some people's rent. His smile flashed as he laughed at something a venture capitalist said, drink in hand. Then he saw her, and the smile faltered, just for a moment, but Imani saw it. She didn't walk toward him. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. She mingled. She let herself be seen. A reporter from Tech Today approached her cautiously. Ms. Brooks, I didn't expect to see you here. She sipped her champagne. Neither did Nathan. The reporter blinked. Would you mind an interview later? Off the record, maybe. Imani smiled. We'll see. Across the room, Lauren stood beside Nathan wearing a red gown and a forced smile. She looked thinner, tenser than Imani remembered. Their eyes met briefly. Lauren looked away first. The gala moved on speeches, video tributes, a string quartet. Imani stood at the edge, unnoticed by the MC, unseen by the slideshow. Until the lights dimmed and the final presentation began. A short documentary. 10 years of disruption. The screen filled with a montage, a young Nathan sketching designs, launching prototypes, closing deals. It was a carefully crafted narrative, heroic, humble, inspiring. Nowhere in it was Imani. Not her strategy meetings, not her pitch decks, not her voice in early interviews. She had been erased completely. And yet when Nathan began to speak in the final segment, talking about his early struggles and the kindness of a few who believed in him, his eyes flickered. Just once. Toward the back of the room. Toward her. The lights came up. Applause thundered. Nathan took the stage. Thank you all for coming, he began, adjusting the microphone. 10 years ago, I had nothing but an idea and a little bit of luck. Today, we celebrate a journey of resilience, a company that has always been about possibility. Imani's stomach turned. He was going to take full credit, again. And then he paused. I want to acknowledge the people who were there at the start, he continued. Not all of them are on this stage. Not all of them are still in my life. A shift rippled through the room. Nathan's eyes found hers again. But without them, none of this would exist. A beat of silence. I hope they know that. The applause that followed was awkward, hesitant. People looked around trying to gauge what had just happened. Imani didn't flinch, didn't blink. She turned and left before dessert. Outside, the air was colder. Graham was waiting by the car holding a long coat. How did it feel, he asked, slipping it over her shoulders. Like closure, she said. As they pulled away from the glowing building behind them, she didn't look back. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Photos from the gala flooded social media. Whispers of, was that Imani Brooks filled tech blogs. A side-by-side image appeared on Twitter, Nathan at the podium, and Imani in her gown with the caption, the woman who built the house and wasn't invited to live in it. The post went viral. Within hours, journalists requested interviews. Podcasts reached out. Activists began tagging Carter Innovations, demanding answers. But Imani didn't speak. Not yet. She was already working on something else. Something bigger than revenge. Imani sat at the long oak table in the Phoenix Holdings boardroom. The city sprawled behind her through glass windows that seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. She had been silent for almost a full minute, letting the last words of the acquisition proposal sink in. Across from her sat Sienna Yu, managing director of Vanguard Bridge Capital, flanked by two junior associates who looked both awed and nervous. We're prepared to offer $110 million, Sienna repeated, placing the folder gently on the table. All cash. Full autonomy retained. Your leadership team stays. We simply want to scale Phoenix with you at the helm. Graham sat to Imani's right, not saying a word. He never did during negotiations unless she invited him to. His faith was quiet, solid, her anchor in rooms that once tried to drown her. Imani didn't pick up the folder. She looked directly at Sienna. Why now? Sienna didn't flinch. Because the landscape is shifting. The old guard is nervous. You've proven that Phoenix doesn't just have cultural cachet, it has staying power, profitability, and mission clarity. You're not a trend, Imani. You're the future. We want in. Imani leaned back, steepling her fingers. She could feel Maya holding her breath just outside the glass wall. The whole team knew this day might come, but not like this. Not just weeks after the gala. Not after the social media storm that hadn't yet settled. Not while Carter Innovations was still reeling from the unexpected fallout of one woman's silent walk through their victory lap. She stood finally opening the proposal. Thick, precise, impressive. And yet something gnawed at her. It wasn't the money, it was the timing. You're not worried about my recent visibility, she asked, voice even. Sienna smiled. We're counting on it. The headlines hadn't stopped since the gala. Imani Brooks, the phoenix behind the throne. Carter Innovations erased its founder. She built a rival empire. How one woman turned silence into a movement. She hadn't said a word to the press. But that hadn't mattered. The world was telling her story for her now. Nathan's carefully cultivated image began to crack. First came the podcast exposés, then the leaked emails from early-stage investors confirming that Phoenix Holdings had been Imani's brainchild. Then a former board member anonymously confirmed to the Times that Nathan had pushed her out to build his own myth. The final blow came when the mental aid app, now a national platform, publicly thanked Imani in a viral post. She believed in us when no one else would. She didn't just invest. She mentored. She fought for us. She deserves credit. Suddenly, Carter Innovations wasn't just a company. It was a cautionary tale. Imani had become the counter-narrative, the antidote. She called an emergency meeting that evening. The Phoenix core team seated around the table leaned in as Imani laid the folder on the table. Vanguard wants us, she said. Gasps. Silence, then Maya leaned forward. You mean they want to buy us? Partner, scale, expand. Imani nodded slowly. Their terms are generous. It's a legacy deal. She paused. But I don't want to be a legacy yet. Maya frowned. Then, what are you thinking? Imani looked around the room. She saw the faces that had built Phoenix from scratch, single moms, scrappy coders, ex-paralegals, artists turned operations leads. Then she smiled, slow and dangerous. I'm thinking of making a bid. Graham stirred beside her. For what? Imani met his eyes. For Carter Innovations. The room exploded in disbelief. What went to? You're joking. Wait, like buy it. She nodded once firmly. Yes, I'm going to buy Nathan's company. The logistics were insane. The risk astronomical. But the opportunity, priceless. Carter Innovations was vulnerable. Their stock had dipped nearly 11% in the last 2 weeks. Their biggest partner, a global tech accelerator, had quietly pulled out of a major initiative, citing value misalignment. Internally, the company was bleeding talent. Several junior engineers had reached out to Phoenix through back channels asking about job openings. Nathan was flailing. His silence had shifted from power to panic, and Imani could feel it. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reformation. I'm not buying it to destroy it, she told Graham as they walked through the park later that week. I'm buying it to rebuild what we once dreamed. Only this time, no egos, no betrayal, just vision. He nodded, slipping his hand into hers. Then let's draft the offer. The news broke on a Friday morning. Phoenix Holdings submits intent to acquire Carter Innovations in surprise bid. Imani's statement was brief, direct. This is not about power. This is about restoration. What was built with integrity should be led with it. I believe Carter Innovations still has the potential to serve. It simply needs a new compass. Nathan's response was equally brief. Phoenix Holdings lacks the infrastructure or liquidity to manage a company of our size. This is a stunt, nothing more. But the media didn't see it as a stunt. They saw it as a reckoning. Public sentiment shifted fast. Former employees began sharing stories about Phoenix's culture, about the way Imani had mentored from within, listened and reinvested in communities. Anonymous feedback about Carter's cold corporate structure and executive egos surfaced. Several minority investors began lobbying for a leadership change. The board couldn't ignore it. Within 2 weeks, Carter Innovations issued a statement. We are reviewing all acquisition proposals and welcome meaningful discussions about the future of our company. Imani's phone lit up. Her bid had moved from fantasy to possibility. In the Phoenix office, tension and hope hummed like static electricity. Graham walked in with 3 coffees and an expression she knew too well. What is it? She asked. He handed her the 3rd cup. It's done, he said. The board has agreed to a formal negotiation. They're flying in next week. She sat down slowly. This wasn't just about a company anymore. This was about returning to the place where her story had been stolen and writing her own ending. But it wouldn't be the kind of ending they expected, because Imani didn't just want to reclaim her past. She wanted to redefine the future. The meeting was set for Thursday, but on Monday morning, while the city hummed with its usual chaos, Imani received a letter. It wasn't an email or a text or a formal inquiry. It was handwritten, on ivory paper, folded carefully into thirds, delivered to her office not by courier, but by a man in a charcoal gray trench coat who said he wanted to be personal, then disappeared down the block without a name. Imani stood at the window for a moment before unfolding it. The handwriting was unmistakable, curved, ornate, too practiced to feel warm. Imani, we need to talk. Not in boardrooms, not through lawyers or proxies, in person. Come to the house, please. Nathan. For a moment, her pulse fluttered. She wasn't sure if it was dread anger or morbid curiosity. The house. The one she'd once decorated. The one with her favorite corner by the window where she used to read startup blogs with coffee in one hand and her unborn daughters rolling under the skin of her belly. The one she left in silence years ago. She didn't tell Graham she was going, not at first. She didn't want his logical concern, didn't want to feel protected. This was something she had to do alone. That night, after tucking the girls in with stories about dragons and cities made of clouds, she slipped on a long wool coat and hailed a cab to the Upper East Side. The driver slowed in front of the brownstone with hesitant respect. Amani stared at the familiar facade. She had once painted those shutters sea green. Now they were slate gray. Nathan opened the door before she could knock. He looked older, or maybe just tired. His suit was unbuttoned. His sleeves were rolled. There was a kind of weariness behind his eyes that hadn't been there at the gala. Not performative fatigue, but the quiet unraveling of someone who finally understood the consequences of a decade of selfish choices. "Thanks for coming," he said. Amani didn't reply. He stepped aside. She walked in. The house had changed, and yet it hadn't. The furniture was more expensive now, the art trendier. But the bones were the same. The way the light hit the staircase, the echo of the wooden floorboards, even the faint scent of lavender from the old diffuser in the hallway. Nathan led her to the living room. A fire crackled in the hearth. He poured 2 drinks but set them down untouched. Then he sat, not across from her but beside her, close enough to feel old memories stir. "I heard about the bid," he said. "I assumed you did," she replied calmly. "You're serious." "I'm not in the habit of bluffing." Nathan chuckled softly. "No, you never were." A silence stretched between them. Then he leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Do they know?" he asked. "Who he know?" "The girls." Imani's breath caught. "So this wasn't just about business." "No," she said flatly. "They don't know you exist." Nathan nodded. "Do they ask?" "Sometimes." He rubbed his hands together. "And what do you say?" "I tell them they were born from courage, and that's enough." She saw the guilt in his face then. It hit not as a slap, but as a slow, corrosive tide. "I was a coward," he whispered. Imani didn't answer. She didn't need to. He continued, "I told myself I had no choice, that marrying Lauren was strategic, that our investors wouldn't back me if I had a child triplets at 28, that I couldn't risk the narrative, that you were just too much." Amani's fingers curled around her glass. "Do you remember what I said the day I told you I was pregnant?" she asked, voice like glass. He nodded. "You said I'll fix this, like I was a bug in your code." He flinched. I didn't mean, but that's how you live," she cut in. "You didn't fix it. You abandoned it. Abandoned them. For a company, for a marriage, for your image." "I regret it," he said. "Every day." "Regret doesn't raise children, Nathan." He looked at her, then eyes wide. "Can I meet them?" Imani stood. "No." He rose too. "I'm not asking for custody or rights. I want to know them, hear their voices, just once." Imani turned to face him fully. "You want to hear them laugh. You gave that up when you signed those papers without reading them, when you took my name off the founding documents, when you called me unstable in that investor call to justify pushing me out." Nathan's face paled. "You heard that. I heard everything." The room fell silent again. Then Nathan walked to the bookshelf, pulled something out, a photo of her, back when they were still building Carter Innovations together, her belly just starting to show, her hands on her laptop, her eyes bright with purpose. "I kept this," he said, "all these years." She took the photo, stared at it, then set it down. "That version of me died in a hospital bed after 3 days of labor," she said softly. "You buried her with your ambition, but something else came back in her place. Someone you don't recognize. I want to. It's too late." She picked up her coat. He stepped toward her. "Imani, please." She looked him dead in the eye. "If you really want redemption, don't ask for access. Earn your silence." Then she left. Back at home, the girls were still asleep. Imani kissed their foreheads one by one. Amara mumbled something about dragons. Nia clutched her glitter notebook. Sky had kicked off her blanket as usual. Imani stood in the doorway and watched them breathe. She thought about ghosts, and how sometimes the living had to become one. The next morning, Phoenix's legal team sent an amendment to the acquisition proposal. It included a stipulation Carter Innovations' current CEO must step down immediately upon merger. The board had 3 days to respond. The Phoenix Holdings war room wasn't sleek or intimidating. It wasn't perched atop a tower, nor hidden behind biometric scanners. It was a renovated warehouse space in Queens with exposed brick, a long table salvaged from a shuttered charter school, and whiteboards that bore the scrawl of dreamers and strategists alike. But inside, the energy was sharper than steel. The team had been working around the clock since the amended bid dropped. The demand was bold: Nathan Carter must step down if the acquisition was to move forward. Some said it was a death wish. Imani called it clarity. The legal team cross-checked every loophole. The financial officers outlined worst-case outcomes in painful detail. The advisors, some old, some new, argued about media fallout, market backlash, political optics. One consultant even dared to suggest they walk it back a little. Imani didn't flinch. "I don't want him silenced," she said. "I want him out. Carter Innovations deserves a clean foundation. If we inherit his rot, we poison our purpose." No one argued after that. Across town, inside the real Carter Innovations boardroom, marble sterile rehearsed Nathan was unraveling. The board had convened in an emergency session the morning after Phoenix's amendment was leaked to Bloomberg. The article had gone viral. Phoenix's CEO demands Carter's exit in bold merger stipulation. Stocks wavered. Investors panicked. Employees whispered in Slack threads and hushed hallway chats. Rumors swirled about buyouts, mass resignations, a potential public relations bloodbath. Nathan tried to maintain composure. He showed up in a navy suit, no tie, fresh haircut. But there was a quiver in his voice, a slight twitch in his left hand as he laid out his counteroffer. "I can retain an advisory role," he said to the board. "Step out of day-to-day. Let Phoenix take over operations. It's a compromise." Darla Mendez, the newest board member and a former Goldman Sachs executive, didn't look impressed. "We don't need a compromise, Nathan," she said coolly. "We need a future." "But I built this," he snapped, voice rising. "I bled for this company." "You also lied," she replied, not unkindly. "You took credit for work that wasn't solely yours. And now the world knows." The chairman, David Liu, cleared his throat. "Nathan, you're still valuable to the industry. You can rebuild. But it's no longer yours to lead." Silence followed. Nathan slumped back in his chair. He looked down at his hands, once so sure, now unsteady. "I was scared," he whispered. "Back then, when Imani got pregnant, when she started outshining me, I didn't think I could keep up." The confession was met with stillness. Then David sighed. Fear doesn't absolve betrayal. A vote was taken. 8 in favor. 3 abstained. None opposed. Nathan Carter was removed as CEO of Carter Innovations, effective immediately. Back at Phoenix, Imani stood before her team with the news. "They accepted," she said, voice quiet. Maya covered her mouth. Graham exhaled. The rest of the room buzzed in disbelief. Imani held up a hand. "We haven't won yet. Due diligence begins tomorrow. Integration plans start this week. There will be audits, media storms, and at least 3 hit pieces before the quarter ends." She looked around the room. These were the people who had followed her through fire, who had built this empire from sidewalk cracks and quiet brilliance. "I don't want celebration," she said. "I want discipline and vision. We're not absorbing a company. We're repurposing a vessel. We don't mimic their world, we transform it." A beat passed. Then one by one they nodded. The war room was converted into a strategy hub overnight. Whiteboards overflowed with timelines. Roles were reassigned. Phoenix and Carter task forces were paired together, albeit uneasily. Graham began mentoring a group of former Carter execs who had never worked under a leader like Imani, direct, no-nonsense, empathetic without being indulgent. Public statements were released. Press interviews were scheduled. Imani agreed to do one national broadcast on her terms. The interviewer tried to bait her with questions about Nathan. "Is it personal?" they asked. She smiled. "It's purposeful." The days blurred. On day 5 of integration planning, a former Carter engineer named Theo approached Imani with a folder. "We found something in the legacy servers," he said, nervous. Inside the folder were documents, old development memos, source code versions, and emails between Nathan and the legal department, including language about suppressing Imani's intellectual property claims in the original prototype of the Carter IQ interface, a key product in their portfolio. She read every word, then quietly passed it to the legal team. "Let them decide," she said. "No press?" Graham asked, watching her carefully. "No revenge," she replied. He nodded. That night she walked home instead of taking a car. She needed to feel her feet on concrete, needed to remember the way the city pulsed when you were on your own without a parachute or publicist. She stopped at a corner bodega and bought 3 bags of gummy bears. At home, her daughters were waiting in their pajamas. Amara had drawn a picture of a lion in a crown with curly hair. "That's you," she said proudly. Nia had made a sign out of pipe cleaners, Queen Boss Mommy. Sky demanded a dance party. And so in the middle of a corporate takeover, in the middle of lawsuits and leaked memos, in the middle of national headlines and digital vitriol, Imani danced with her daughters in the living room. Feet bare, heart full, because the war wasn't over. But she wasn't alone in it anymore. The formal merger of Phoenix Holdings and Carter Innovations was finalized at exactly 9:43 a.m. on a Monday, with a signature that was more ceremonial than celebratory. The deal had been approved, scrutinized, revised, and dissected over 27 days, 5 legal teams and 3 regulatory committees. Imani signed her name last as CEO of the new entity, Phoenix Carter Group, a group that bore her mark from its ashes. But the ink on the paperwork was still drying when the tremors began. Not from Phoenix, from Carter's legacy, or rather what remained of it. The first blow came from the SEC. An investigation was opened into improper reporting of intellectual property ownership during Carter Innovations' 2016-2018 growth period. Anonymous whistleblowers had come forward armed with internal memos, source code discrepancies, and documents previously buried under layers of NDAs. The name Brooks appeared in nearly every report. Imani declined public comment. Instead, she issued a directive full internal transparency. Every email, every contract, every audit trail. No cleaning, she told compliance. We show them the dirt and how we're scrubbing it. Phoenix's reputation only grew. Carter's crumbled. The second hit came from a wave of high-level resignations. Board members who had once celebrated Nathan's vision quietly stepped down. PR firms distanced themselves. Sponsorships were pulled. College partnerships paused collaborations. Former interns shared stories online, some about toxic workplace culture, others about gendered gatekeeping and silent harassment that HR had ignored for years. Imani watched it all unfold from the corner office she hadn't asked for, but now inhabited. The skyline beyond her windows seemed strangely subdued, as if the city too was holding its breath. This isn't our scandal, Maya reminded her during one particularly tense debrief. No, Imani replied, but it is our responsibility. And so she faced it. Head on. She launched a full-scale reform. A new ethics committee, half of whom were Carter employees who had spoken up. A revised equity package for junior staff. A diversity audit with an independent third party. Pay equity corrections across departments. She announced town halls, not virtual, not optional. In the first one, she stood in front of 800 employees and said, I can't fix the past, but I can promise you this, there will be no more shadows. We lead in light now. The applause lasted longer than she expected, but not everyone clapped. Nathan, now a public ghost, remained silent. No tweets, no op-eds, just gone. Until the interview, he resurfaced on a financial podcast, his voice noticeably strained. I regret how I handled things, he said. But the company was mine. I built it, and I lost it not to innovation but to vengeance. The host asked if he was referring to Imani. Nathan didn't answer. The clip made its rounds. Imani said nothing. She didn't need to. The very next day, 3 more founders publicly credited her for launching their businesses, ones Nathan had once passed over. And then the final domino. Tech Truth Weekly released an investigative cover story, The Real Carter Innovations, the Woman Behind the Curtain. The article laid it all bare. How Imani's name had been quietly removed from patent filings. How the marketing pivot that made Carter IQ successful had come directly from her notes taken during maternity leave. How she'd been framed as emotionally unstable for challenging Nathan's power plays. The world had always whispered. Now it screamed. Phoenix Carter's valuation dipped temporarily from the shock. But it rebounded faster than anyone predicted. In fact, it soared. Because people didn't just believe in Imani, they trusted her. She didn't chase clout. She built legacy. And when the dust settled, it was clear that the collapse of Carter Innovations had made way for something far greater. A company with soul. In a rare moment of pause, Imani sat alone in the new community hall Phoenix had built in Brooklyn. It wasn't fancy concrete floors, modular seating murals painted by local teens, but it pulsed with life. Tonight it was empty. Just her, a notebook, and the city buzzing faintly beyond the glass. She thought about collapse, how it could look like punishment but be transformation, how it could burn but also clear the ground for seeds that had never been given sunlight. Nathan had collapsed. His image, his empire, his illusion. But she had risen from the same fire. Not untouched, but unbroken. The next morning a letter arrived by mail. No return address, just her name. Inside a folded page. Short. You were right. I built a tower without a foundation. And you built a legacy without revenge. I hope they know what kind of mother they have. She stared at the letter for a long time, then tucked it into the bottom drawer of her desk. She wouldn't respond. Some stories didn't need sequels. Some ghosts belong to memory, not to life. And this life hers was still unfolding. The letter arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, tucked into the stack of mail delivered to Phoenix Carter's new headquarters downtown. It wasn't stamped or postmarked, no courier signature, no return address. Just her name on the front of a heavy white envelope written in the same looping script she hadn't seen in years this time, less ornate, more restrained. Imani recognized it immediately. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she slipped it into her bag and went about the day meetings, staff check-ins, a call with city officials about a new mentorship initiative for girls in underserved communities. Business as usual, though her mind kept returning to the envelope, like a tiny thorn pressing through fabric. It wasn't until well after dark, when the office had emptied out and the rain continued tapping against the windows, that she sat at her desk, pulled the envelope from her bag, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. The handwriting was careful, controlled. Imani, this will be the last time I write. Not because I've run out of things to say, but because you deserve peace, and I don't want to interrupt it anymore. You won. I don't mean that in bitterness. I mean it in awe. You won in every way that counts. You built what I thought only I could. You led where I failed. You loved without the need for applause. I've spent the past few months thinking not about what I lost, but about who I lost. About the nights I sat in boardrooms while you were alone in that delivery room. About the first steps I missed. The birthdays I never knew to count. About the way our daughters, yes, I still think of them as mine, even if I have no right to will grow up, never knowing the sound of my voice except through someone else's version of it. I don't ask for forgiveness. I wouldn't believe I'd earned it. But I want you to know you made me feel something I never expected to feel after losing everything. Gratitude. Not because you let me off the hook, God knows you didn't, but because you showed me what strength really looks like. There is one more thing, and I ask only that you do with it what you believe is right. In my will, I've left a trust. Not for me, not for Carter Innovations, but for the 3 girls you raised on your own. It's not redemption. It's not a bargain. It's just the only offering I have left. You don't have to tell them where it came from. You don't have to acknowledge it at all, but I needed to leave something behind that wasn't just destruction. I hope someday when they're older, they'll understand how much of the world they already carry, and how none of that came from me. You don't owe me anything, Imani. You never did. But thank you for building something out of what I broke. With respect, Nathan. She read it twice, then a third time, each word landing softer than the last. She thought of the man she had once loved and how that love had curdled into silence, then turned into armor. How she had spent so long building from scratch not just a business, but a life, a home, a version of motherhood that didn't rely on backup plans or shared burdens. She thought of her girls, of their laughter, their defiance, their brilliance. They had never asked about a father again. They didn't need a shadow story. They had light, and that had always been enough. Imani folded the letter slowly and placed it inside a drawer she rarely opened, one filled with fragments of a life left behind, ultrasound photos, one lone business card from Carter's first pitch meeting, and now this final letter. Closure not from an apology, but from the knowledge that she no longer needed one. 2 weeks later, her lawyer confirmed that a trust had been formally transferred to a foundation in her daughter's names. The origin was legally sealed, untraceable. No headlines, no strings. She let it be. Didn't touch it. Didn't spend it. Just watched it quietly grow in the background, like a tree planted in fall, bare at first, but full of promise. That Sunday, she took the girls to Prospect Park. The air was crisp, the sky a blue, so clear it looked painted. They laid out a blanket under a maple tree. Sky chased pigeons. Nia read her newest chapter book aloud. Amara asked Imani how buildings were named after people, and if one day theirs might be too. Imani smiled. We don't need a name on a building, she said. We build in people. They didn't fully understand, but they nodded content. Later that evening, after dinner and baths and the chaos of hair detangling and sock sorting, Imani sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea. She looked at the framed photo on the mantel, not of her or Nathan or the company, but of her 3 girls at last year's science fair, covered in glitter and glue, grinning with the confidence of children who had never been told their dreams were impossible. She thought of legacy, and how sometimes the greatest legacy wasn't built with capital or code, but with resilience, with choices, with silence turned into wisdom, and letters no one ever needed to answer. Spring arrived like a quiet blessing. Cherry blossoms painted the sidewalks in soft pink hues, and the city, ever in motion, seemed to exhale after a long, cold season of transformation. At Phoenix Carter headquarters, the energy had shifted. Gone were the wary glances between legacy employees and new hires. In their place, laughter in the break rooms, collaborative sticky notes plastered across glass walls, and teams made not by merger, but by mutual respect. Imani stood on the mezzanine during the morning briefing, looking out over the bustling floor below. People she once thought would never work together now shared desks, debated strategies, and bonded over late-night delivery runs during product sprints. There was no longer a division between them and us. Only we. And that more than the revenue milestones or the glowing media profiles was the real victory. That evening, Imani returned home later than usual. The apartment lights were still on. Inside, the girls were in the kitchen with Graham. Sky was on a stool whisking pancake batter with extreme concentration. Amara was setting the table with cloth napkins like it was a five-star restaurant, and Nia, ever the scientist, was attempting to use a laser thermometer on the griddle. Imani leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene quietly. She remembered when she did this alone, when dinner meant boxed mac and cheese, when bedtime routines had to be choreographed to the minute, and when loneliness clung to her even after the girls had fallen asleep. But Graham had never forced his way in. He came gently. At first as a mentor, then a partner, and finally something more permanent. The girls had accepted him long before she gave him permission to stay. It wasn't about biology. It was about presence, consistency, love. Mom Sky spotted her first. "We're making breakfast for dinner." Amara grinned. "We voted. Pancakes won." Nia looked up. "Technically, French toast was disqualified because you forgot we're out of eggs." Imani laughed. "Then I guess I'm just in time to supervise this culinary rebellion." Graham kissed her on the cheek. "We saved you the big spatula." Later that night, after dishes were washed and small bodies were tucked beneath blankets, Imani sat with Graham on the balcony, the city lights flickering beneath them. They were quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Imani's heart skipped. He didn't open it right away. "I know," he began softly, "that you've already done the hardest parts. The building, the healing, the raising. You didn't need anyone to rescue you. You saved yourself." She said nothing, sensing there was more. "I'm not here to erase the past," he continued, "or replace someone who left. I just want to be what you choose, every day. No ceremony needed, just this." He opened the box. Inside was no diamond, no ring, just a simple silver pendant engraved with 4 names, hers and the girls. She looked at it for a long time, then back at him. "I already chose you," she said, voice low. He smiled. "Then I guess this just makes it official." The next morning, Imani called a meeting, not with investors, not with department heads, but with her daughters. They sat on the living room rug, legs crossed, eyes wide with curiosity. "Okay," she said, pulling out a whiteboard. Amara gasped. "Is this about the puppy again? Because I thought we said—" "No," Imani laughed. "This is bigger." She drew 3 stick figures, then a 4th with a tie, then herself. "This is us," she said, "and I wanted to ask how you feel about something." "Is it about Graham?" Nia asked, squinting. Imani nodded. "He'd like to become officially part of our family. But only if you want that too." Silence. Then Sky burst out. "Can he still make pancakes if he's official?" "Yes." "Then yes." So sono konatsa. Amara looked thoughtful. "Will we be a real family then?" Imani met her eyes. "We already are. This would just mean putting it on paper." Nia raised her hand. "Will he get a title like bonus dad or substitute dad?" Graham walked in at that moment with juice boxes and said, "I vote for Sidekick Supreme." The girls squealed. The vote passed unanimously. Months later, they held a small ceremony in Prospect Park under the same maple tree they'd picnicked under that spring. No tuxedos. No crowd. Just the 5 of them. Graham wore a navy vest and a crooked tie the girls had insisted on helping him with. Imani wore a white pantsuit and sneakers. The girls wore matching dresses, each holding a balloon. A city clerk read the papers. Imani and Graham exchanged words. Not vows, but promises. And when it was done, Amara released her balloon into the sky, declaring, "This is the best merger ever." In the years that followed, the Phoenix Carter Group expanded into new cities. It launched initiatives to bring mental health access into public schools. It funded women-led startups, provided scholarships, and redefined what ethical entrepreneurship could look like. But Imani's greatest project remained at home. A family built not by circumstance, but by choice. Love, she'd learned, wasn't something you waited for. It was something you forged, and she had forged hers in silence, in sorrow, in triumph, and in truth. And now enjoy. One night much later, when the city was quiet and the girls were asleep, Amani sat by the window with her journal and wrote, "They say family is blood, but I've learned it's something else entirely. It's who stays, who builds, who chooses you again and again, even when they don't have to. And that's love worth fighting for." She closed the journal and finally rested.